All right, it is Wednesday and it is 1 o'clock here on the East Coast, which means it is time for the DroneSense Basic Training Working Group. Wish I had lights and flashers to go off every time I said that, but you can pretend in your mind. Today's topic is understanding the QEP process. So if you're not flying DJI, if you've already gone through this process, this training is probably not going to be very informative for you. But for those of you who have never gone through the QEP process, don't know what the QEP process is, or want some better understanding, that is what we are going to cover today. So first and foremost, we're going to look at the agenda for today. What is the QEP process? We'll take a look at the necessary paperwork and documentation required, applying the unlock in DJI versus DroneSense, and then a couple of troubleshooting tips and tricks and Q&A at the end, as always. So first and foremost, what is the QEP process? Well, the QEP process, or the Qualified Entities Program, is a service offered through DJI that provides government and public safety agencies a process by which to remove all flight restrictions and geofencing from the aircraft. Again, this is only applicable to DJI aircraft. This was, again, designed specifically for public safety, not like Lance. This is meant to allow you to self-certify and basically get in the air and fly when you need to fly. This is the best practice for public safety to go through the QEP process. Here at DroneSense, we try to put all of our agencies that we onboard through the process right out of the gate so that we're never limiting operations. So with that, how do we become a QEP user? And, there's a couple ways you can go about this, but specifically for DroneSense customers, you can work with myself or anybody else from the CS team, and we can get you set up. But federal, state, local, public safety agencies and entities are going to have to submit the following documentation. So there's a QEP application. They're going to need a copy of the terms and conditions that they send, either a copy of the Part 107 of your chief pilot, or a copy of your COA, or any other similar authorization document from the FAA. They're going to need to have a copy of that on file. An authorization letter on official entity letterhead from the program manager or head of the department. So this can be something as simple as, my name is John Doe. I work for XYZ Sheriff's Office. I am requesting access to the QEP process. Signed, John Doe. That's all that is. And then there's some contact information needed that gets updated on a regular basis. Once this is done, this typically only has to be recertified once a year. The process has been going incredibly smooth lately and just taking a couple of hours from the time I'm submitting documentation until I'm getting an approval email back. So it's a fairly quick process. And again, for public safety, I think it is imperative that you put your entire fleet through this program. So with that being said, I've got this QR code up on the screen. I'm going to leave this up for just a minute for you guys to scan. This will get you into a shared Google Drive folder we have that contains all of the necessary documentation. So those terms and conditions, the QEP application, as well as a spreadsheet for craft and IDs. And then there's also several other documents in there that are the various unlocking steps, depending on the DJI app you are using. So what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to stop sharing this screen, and I am going to jump over and share another screen so that we can kind of just talk through the documentation real quick here. So as you can see here, this is the documentation folder. We have our user crafts and IDs, the QEP application, terms and conditions, as well as unlocking steps for all the various apps. Now, I would just want to take a look really quickly at each one of the docs, starting with the application. So what we are looking at right now is the application form that is necessary to start this process. Very, very simple information being asked for here. Name of entity, your program manager, some contact information. This unlocking information, I would not worry yourself with this unlocking information because there is a spreadsheet attachment that must be done along with the application and the rest of the paperwork that contains this information. So I would leave 6, 7, and 8 blank. And then you can see as we scroll down, it's asking for some additional attachments. And those attachments are just the signed terms and conditions, that authorization letter, either a copy of our Part 107 or a copy of our COA, and then a copy of that user and craft ID spreadsheet. And so that's attachment A, B, C, and D. Out of all the agencies I've put through the process, I think I have had one agency actually send me their documentation back with the proper attachment names. DJI is a stickler for wanting this as attachment names and wanting this proper spreadsheet. So if you could save me a couple steps and just remember to list your attachments as A, B, C, and D that correspond to the correct documents, makes my life a little bit easier. But again, we get this thing signed out, and that is step one. From here, attachment A, as you can see here, is going to be the signed terms and conditions. So these are the terms and conditions. I'm not going to sit here and read these out to you. You guys now have access to them through the document link that I shared, and I will be sure to share that again when we wrap up. But just all of the terms and conditions. So you can either go through this with your legal department or not. That's completely up to you. I would advise you to go through legal just to make sure everything is on the up and up. We get through all of our terms and conditions here, come down all the way to the bottom and sign. Fairly simple here. Obviously, then attachment B, like we saw, is going to be that authorization letter. Attachment C is going to be a copy of that Part 107, copy of that COA, or any other flight authorization document from the FAA or even Transport Canada, as we do have some Canadian agencies on the DroneSense platform. But then the last piece that we're going to need is this attachment D. So this is what attachment D looks like. Very, very simple here. We are looking for account lists. And by that, I mean whatever email address your agency is using for its DJI login. Now, we've seen some agencies where every single pilot, every single person has a DJI login. We'll talk about that a little more once we get to it. But whatever email addresses are associated with your DJI account, we would list them here. Device Fcsn. This is the flight controller serial number from the aircraft. This is not to be confused with the RC serial number. The flight controller is on the aircraft itself. This is not the remote controller serial number. And then you can see the last field here. We've got some drop downs where we can select whatever aircraft type that we're applying for. Get all that filled in. You can either send those documents to me, or you can send those documents directly into DJI, and I'll show you how to do that here in just a second. A lot of people, though, have trouble pulling the flight control serial number information. So I'm going to show you two places where you can find that. So just real quickly here, I'm going to jump over and I'm going to stop sharing this tab, and I am going to share another tab. So we are here in DroneSense. Come down to hardware. Whatever aircraft we're going to add to our QEP, we'll click that aircraft. FC serial number. This is the information we want right here. So we would take that and we would put it in that form. Now you also have the option of pulling this directly through the mobile application itself. And you can do that on DJI or on the DroneSense application. But I think, to me, this is the easiest place to find that flight controller serial number. And so we've looked over the documentation. You've got it all filled in. More than likely, you have emailed it to me, and I have started the process to go through the unlocks. So now we get our email back that says, hey, you've been approved to join the DJI QEP process. Well, it doesn't just magically give us clearance to start flying. It doesn't just magically remove these unlocks. There are still some steps that we have to do to be able to pull these unlocks into the system. So again, we had this list of documentation here that you can see. Depending on what aircraft you're using, we have unlocking steps for ground station RTK, for DJI Pilot, for DJI Fly, DJI Go, and DJI Go 4. Again, just depending on what aircraft you're unlocking will depend on what steps you follow. What I'm going to do now is I am going to share my remote controller screen. All right, so what we are looking at right now is the smart controller screen. I'm going to go through the unlocking process with you, specifically from DJI Pilot. Come into DJI Pilot. It takes it a minute to load. Obviously, the screen clarity and resolution is pretty terrible. So we got some inconsistent firmware. I'm not going to go through any of this today, but we'll talk about both of these once we get to kind of some last steps. I'm going to ignore. We come into the main screen of the DJI Pilot app. Up here in the top right corner, we're going to go into Geo Zone Unlocking. And you can see I have an unlock that is already listed here. For you guys going through it for the first time, you would hit the refresh button in the top of the screen, and this would pull in our special unlocks or our QEP or our custom unlocks, our NFC unlocks, whatever we've gone through will have then been pulled into DJI, to which we can then toggle on. I am authorized. I accept full responsibility. Okay. And of course, user authentication failed. So there are a couple of reasons of why this can fail. This can fail because of poor firmware. This can fail because maybe we have some apps running in the background that we shouldn't. This can also fail because it is out of date. And so you can see I'm getting kickback from the application saying that I am unauthorized. So I'm going to go in one more time here. And hopefully this QEP that I'm using hasn't expired, so I can at least get you guys an idea of what this looks like. But another reason we could be seeing this issue is because our FlySafe database is not up to date, and you can also see we were getting popped for a mismatched firmware on the battery. So we'll try this one more time. If it doesn't work, I'm not overly concerned. I just want to at least get you guys an understanding of the process itself. Fat fingers thing in here, goodness gracious. So toggle that on. I am. Okay. So what this tells me is that more than likely this QEP is either out of date or my account has been removed. Typically, this can also be a case if we have hardware that is out of date, out of firmware range. But again, at least you should have an understanding of what the process looks like. But this is only one piece of the process. Once we have unlocked everything in DJI, we still have to go into DroneSense and pull these unlocks in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to completely close out, get back to our main screen here. I'm going to come into DroneSense. And again, we've already gone through the unlocking process on DJI. I'll log into my account, super secure PIN. Select a mission. We get into our heads-up display. You can see I've got good GPS connectivity. Let me try to clear out all these warnings so this doesn't keep popping up. I know this is a big problem for a lot of you. Don't worry, it's something we're working on. But to pull these unlocks into DJI, I'm going into the top right-hand corner, clicking the cog gear, the aircraft icon. From here, I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom where it says Manage Fly Zones. Now, you can see there's a couple of notes here, but what I want you to do is you're going to click on where it says Log into DJI. And what I need you guys to understand is that this is a DJI-provided widget. Our team has no way of debugging or troubleshooting any issues that you run into with this widget. It is very slow. It is very clunky. But it is the same widget that all third parties have to use to pull these unlocks in. So you can see here, it's asking me for my credentials. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a set of credentials that were provided to me that I know are linked with this aircraft. So again, it's asking for an email address, and that is our DJI email address that we listed on the account. So I'm just going to take a second, put in, try to get this all correct here. And for a second, I am going to disconnect so you guys cannot see the password that I am putting in. So obviously, I know you're getting a nasty line screen. Just give me 1 second. I'll put in the password, and then we can get back to it. All right, punch it back in. Get it back on the screen. I'll click login to DJI. This could take a few seconds. This could take a couple of minutes. So now you see I am logged in, but you can see right now it says not authorized. And if I scroll down, I can also see my little Forsyth County Fire toggle, but my status is not authorized. As soon as I close this out and jump right back in here, come down to manage fly zones, you can see we are now authorized. I can come in, I can toggle that unlock on, and now we have pulled our QEP unlock into DJI. This is the process. This is always the process. Now we get a lot of complaints sometimes that say, well, I'm unable to log out. Again, this is a widget from DJI. We have no way of troubleshooting. So sometimes you'll click log out and it'll be instant. Sometimes it takes a few seconds, like you see there. Sometimes it doesn't work and you have to completely close the app and start from scratch. Again, this is a limitation of DJI's widget and not of the DroneSense platform. Does everybody have a good understanding now of how we go through the unlock process, both on the DJI side and on the DroneSense side? Are there any questions about what we've covered to this point? So again, just to hit on that point, it's only after you've ingested those unlocks into the native apps that you can ingest them into the DroneSense mobile application. And I heard my chat just blink, so I'm going to jump back in. Yes, Gabe, don't worry. Don't you worry. So moving on from here, we looked at the process, what that looks like. Now I want to talk about some tips, tricks, and some troubleshooting that are imperative to making this work correctly. To make it simple for DJI, to make it simple for DroneSense, to make it simple for your agency, please just use one DJI account for your entire organization. Here at DroneSense, for our QEP, we have an ops@dronesense.com email address that is set up for our DJI account. There's no individual user accounts. We don't have to worry about individual users who may or may not have access, having to log in, log out. We already saw that process can be a little clunky. Please just use one DJI account for your organization. The next tip for me, do your entire fleet at once. I've had agencies that are like, oh, we're just going to put, one aircraft through the QEP process for now. While it's not difficult to add additional aircraft over time, to me, it makes more sense to just knock it all out once, get it all done up front, pull all that information together, and just get it done. Especially for agencies that have large fleets where we're talking, 10, 15, 20 plus aircraft, just knock it all out at once. Another thing from an operational perspective, even though we are removing all the restrictions from the aircraft, that doesn't mean that we suddenly have permission to go fly anywhere and everywhere. We still have to abide by FAA regulations. We still have to follow the guidelines listed in our COA. So I think it is important that once you have completed this process, establish an SOP, SOG around, what that QEP access looks like, or make sure you at least include some information about what the QEP process does for your fleet in your SOPs, SOGs. Just because I could take my drone down to the center of Hartsfield-Jackson, main runway and take off without any kind of restrictions does not mean that I should. So again, it is important to establish SOP, SOG around this access. Another one that I briefly hit on, the FlySafe database must be updated prior to processing unlocks. I know a lot of us will often skip ignore the updates. This is something that must be updated prior to processing these unlocks, and it's probably the reason that I was unable to get it to initially activate within DJI. The last one that's listed here, and this is the most important piece. I get beat up on these QEP tickets from agencies needing support because they can't get their QEP to work. 9 times out of 10, this is the reason. These unlocks must be processed in both DJI and in DroneSense with GPS connectivity. The QEP process is only something that applies to North America. So the drone has to know where it is in space to be able to even know that these QEP unlocks are appropriate. So you must go through this process with GPS connectivity. You must go through this process with GPS connectivity. You must go through this process with GPS connectivity. I hit on that because we constantly are getting beat up on issues with QEP unlocks. And our support team that's on the call, they can attest to just how many tickets we see, and 9 times out of 10, it is just because they're trying to do this in their office or at home with the aircraft sitting on their desk where they do not have GPS connectivity. The aircraft has to know where it is in space to be able to pull in and process these unlocks. Another one that I want to list that I didn't type out here, it's also imperative that you do a good job keeping your hardware up to date. Something recently that we've noticed along the lines of QEP and a couple of other issues, we see a lot of tickets on poor performance after battery swaps, specifically with Mavics. And what we have discovered is that agencies are forgetting that when they do aircraft firmware updates, that needs to be applied to all of their batteries. And so by flying with a good up-to-date battery that's got everything up-to-date, QEP process is unlocked, everything's clean and clear, when we land and swap batteries and maybe we swap to a battery that is a firmware version behind or out of date, we can get some odd behavior. One of those behaviors that we see is being forced logged out of the QEP process, poor video quality, and really bad sluggish latency, and also the inability to connect the drone to DroneSense. We have determined that this is all a byproduct of not having updated all of your firmware across all of your batteries. So just something to bear in mind there, because that also can affect your QEP connectivity. And guys, with that being said, let's open it up and let's have a discussion here. Knock that out in about 30 minutes. What I'll do on the slide deck, I'm going to take us back to that last QR code here. Give you guys some time to scan that. This is to that Google Drive of master documents that you can get filled out. Again, this is something we try to get all of our agencies through up front. Because it's imperative that you guys be able to get in the air and operate without having to do this in the field, without having to, make a million phone calls. Let's get this knocked out ahead of time so we can get in the air and do what we need to do. Questions, comments, concerns, feedback. I'm looking at you guys.
Hey, Josh, it's Coy. I got
Coy.
one for you, dude. Hey, buddy. Hey, so any suggestions? So you said this is good for a year. Any suggestions on like how to make sure that you're remaining current so this thing doesn't just come and go? I mean, should we set this up on our maintenance schedule?
Yeah, so this is something you could set up as a part of your maintenance schedule. I do know that on the DJI side, when they push this through, they typically push this unlock out for like 10 years. They're typically just looking for you to send in a copy of your COA or your Part 107 year over year, just so they can make sure you're current. I have not run into any issues with agencies that have had their QEP shut down after a year, but the process at least outlines that they would like to see current copy of COA or a Part 107 or other type FAA release once a year.
Cool, man. So
that's something you could definitely set up through the maintenance portal.
Set up just a reminder. Nice.
Yeah.
Any advice? So on the DJI side, let's say our guys are out in the field and there's something going down on the weekends or nights, and number to call. Like, what do you? We've heard the horror stories, right? Of, man, I had this call out and and it ended up being at the end of a runway, and it wasn't, it took a while for this to get to the right people to make this happen. How long would you say it takes DJI to typically, hit us back? I mean, they're doing a lot better, man. They're doing a good job, but like, is there a
yeah, so I just put DeKalb County Sheriff's Office through the process last week. It took DeKalb some time to get all their documentation in order, but from the time I submitted it to DJI, it was an hour and a half, and I was giving unlock steps to DeKalb. Those of you that have been in the space for a while, this is something that used to take 24, 48, 72 hours. Now it's gotten a lot more streamlined. But again, Coit raises a good question. What do we do if we're at, we got to call out at the end of a runway? You're gonna abide by whatever. If you're flying under a COA, you're gonna abide by whatever requirements your COA lists. If you're not flying under a COA, or even if you are flying under a COA, pick up and call that SGI number. They'll get you clearance to get you in the air as quick as possible, legally. This is the unlocks to give you the ability to fly in that controlled airspace once you have gone through the process to either get permission or abiding by your COA, or have gone through that SGI process. You still have to have, you still have to be abiding by the rules. This is just taking one step away, basically.
Nice.
And another thing to understand, and many of you on this call may or may not know this, the QEP process does unlock about 95% of the geofenced airspace in the United States. There are still areas that a QEP unlock will not give you access into. The DC freeze is definitely one of them, but there are also several restricted sites, restricted areas, if you will. Without getting too much into detail, I will say that there is an area near Camp Lejeune that even if you have a fully unlocked aircraft, you will not be able to fly without some additional steps. I'll just leave it at that. Several MOAs throughout the United States do not recognize the QEP unlock. So you will have to take additional steps specifically with DJI on that. And that is something that can take a little bit of time. So just something to be aware of. If you're in some complex airspace, or maybe you have some MOAs in your call area, it may be worth doing a little bit of research to find out if that area is in fact something that would be unlocked, or that is unlocked as a part of your QEP. I have worked with an agency here on the East Coast that was a fully QEP'd fleet that was in an area of, we'll say, high security on an operation, and they were not able to fly their aircraft, even though it was unlocked, and even though they were on U.S. soil. This agency had to reach out to DJI HQ to get a special unlock sent to them so that they could fly their Chinese-made aircraft on U.S. soil. So it's a very interesting story there. I'm not going to get into any more of the details, but just understand that there are some areas in the U.S. that your QEP does not apply to, and it would be imperative that you figure out within your call territory, within your response area, if any of those areas exist, and what your plans are if you have to operate in those areas. Are there any other questions, comments, concerns about the QEP process?
Hey, Josh, it's Quid again. I don't have, just because there's some quiet, just some folks we're a little quiet right now, but something that you've emphasized over and over again, and I really appreciate you saying it, is just running one app at a time, right? So it's really easy to get a grayed out screen, or to be flying and operating. And I know that our support team is here on the call with us, and man, these guys are our heroes. They keep taking these calls on these same calls over and over again. But that's that would be one to really pay attention to, right? Is making sure that we only have one app running at a time.
Yeah, correct. We always want to have just one, as far as it relates to flight control, we always just want to have one app running. We never want to have DJI running in the background. We never want to have DroneSense running in the background when we're operating in DJI. It causes some data integrity issues. It can cause some platform stability issues. We often run into, when we're doing initial training, that agencies think that they first have to go into DJI and then launch DroneSense. And that's not the case. And that's not the case with Autel. That's not the case with Parrot. One app, one flight control app. If you need to switch back and forth between the apps, we would ask that you do it with the bird on the ground. Again, there's some platform integrity, some data integrity issues, some performance integrity issues that can happen switching back and forth between applications or having one or the other running in the background. So just something to remember there. Well, guys, that pretty much wraps up everything that I wanted to cover today. As always, we could stay on here until 2 o'clock. If you guys have questions, comments, concerns, anything you want to talk amongst yourselves about, any questions for the DroneSense team, the support team, what do we got? Mike Christie, I saw you unmuted. What do you got?
Going back to the QE process. Now that, just to clarify, that's per drone, correct? So that's
yes.
Like 2 M210s, so I've got to do it twice.
Correct. Okay. Yeah, it's per aircraft. So you can submit all the paperwork on both of them at once, but the unlock steps, you'll have to do it with one aircraft and then you'll do it with the other.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, and as always, thank you guys for joining, and stay safe, enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll talk to you all very soon.